right here. Sorry. Yeah, that's fine because we're not going to have room for the speakers. Right here, yeah. And Chief Franklin. Yeah. Just maybe move that just a bit. Is that okay? Okay. Good morning. We'll get started here in just a minute, but before we do start, I'm Michelle Brooks, City of Tulsa Communications Director. Thank you for being here. We do have 4 speakers today. Tulsa Police Chief Wendell Franklin, Dr. Cliff Robertson, Dr. Ryan Parker, and Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum. Before we start, just so you know, all the remarks will be complete and then we will take questions. So the Q&A session will be at the end. When we start with the media questions, we will start on this end and move this way. We will have the opportunity to ask plenty of questions, but we want to have some sort of fluid questions starting from here, and then we'll span this way. When we have all the speakers will give their remarks. When you ask your question, please address it to a speaker behind me. They will come to the podium, they will repeat the question, and then they will reply. So with that, we'll get started, and Chief Franklin is here.
Good morning. I'm Chief Wendell Franklin with the Tulsa Police Department. I want to start out by saying that, first off, the most accurate information, the most proper information is going to come from one source, and that's the Tulsa Police Department. We at the Tulsa Police Department, we grieve with the families after this senseless tragedy. We grieve with the co-workers. And we pray. We pray because we all need prayer. I cannot begin to thank the men and women of the Tulsa Police Department for the immediate response that they had to the incident yesterday. Our training led us to take immediate action without hesitation. That's exactly what officers do, and that's what they did in this instance. They had the right mindset framed and went into action and did a tremendous job. The other first responders that came to the scene, the Tulsa Fire Department, Oklahoma Highway Patrol, Tulsa County Sheriff's Office, the St. Francis Security Team, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, United States Marshal Service, Tribal Police, and other federal and local agencies all responded and descended upon 61st and Yale yesterday. This was not done. This was a coordinated effort. It was not done haphazardly. I also have to thank the dispatchers and call takers at our 911 center that reacted as they were trained. Law enforcement across the nation is dealing with increased violence among people. This is yet another act of violence upon an American city. I will say that as a Tulsa police officer, we train, and we train. And we train for instances such as this. And I'm overwhelmed and proud of the men and women, all those that responded yesterday. Now I want to take some time and go over the timeline with you as we know it today. This information is fluid and can still change. But it is the most accurate information that we have at this point. Before I do that, let me go ahead and provide the names of the victims. And I will allow St. Francis to elaborate more on those victims. We have Dr. Preston Phillips, Dr. Stephanie Huson, Amanda Green, William Love, and our suspect, Michael Lewis. On May 19th, Michael Lewis went into the hospital for a back surgery. The performing physician was Dr. Preston Phillips. Mr. Lewis was released on 5/24, May the 24th. After release, Lewis called several times over several days, complaining of pain and wanted additional treatment. On May 31st, Dr. Phillips saw Mr. Lewis again for additional treatment. Yesterday, June the 1st, Lewis called Dr. Phillips' office again, complaining of back pain and wanting additional assistance. Now, we know through the help of our ATF and their gun tracing that at 2 p.m. on June the 1st, Mr. Lewis purchased a semi-automatic rifle from a local gun store. That semi-automatic rifle was an AR-15 style rifle. We know that Mr. Lewis purchased a semi-automatic handgun, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol, on May the 29th from a local pawn shop. I now want to go into the shooting timeline. At 4:52 p.m. on June the 1st, a third party who was on a video chat off location with an on-location doctor called 911, saying the doctor told her to call 911, saying there has been a shooting. At 4:53 p.m., we received a 911 call about a shooter in a building. We then continued to receive multiple calls that were more specific on a shooter being on the second floor of the Natalie building on the campus of St. Francis Hospital. At 4:55 p.m., a person called and clarified the Natalie building as the scene of the shooting. The first Tulsa police officers arrived 1 minute later at 4:56 p.m. I want to give some context on the Natalie building. The Natalie building is a 5-story medical office building with numerous offices, rooms, hallways, and so forth. It is an exceedingly complex environment. A tactical situation for an officer to deal with is pretty complex. Officers entered the building on the first floor and made their way to the second floor based on the information they received. While on the second floor of the vast building, officers began yelling, "Tulsa police." This is something that we train to do. As officers were calling out Tulsa police and advancing towards a suspect location, they heard a gunshot. We believe that was the final gunshot, with the suspect taking his own life. The gunshot was at 4:58 p.m., approximately 39 seconds after the first officers entered the building. As officers started clearing the building, they came across a victim that was down in the exam room. Officers requested IMSA to the floor and continued searching for the suspect. This victim later died at the hospital. We found the suspect, and we rescued a female who was hiding under a desk at the suspect's foot. She was there when the suspect took his life. She did not appear to be injured. Officers rescued that victim who was hiding under a desk, but officers also located another deceased victim next to the shooting suspect. Officers continued to search the building for victims or additional suspects and came across another victim that was down in an open area near a nurse's station. At this point, officers began directing first responders, EMSA, and fire to those victims to render first aid. Again, this is something that we work cooperatively with, and we can go into what we call a hot environment with medical personnel and fire personnel and start rendering aid. In that same room there was the victim was at, officers also rescued an elderly female that was in the room. As officers continued to clear the building, they located Dr. Phillips deceased in an exam room. As officers continued to clear the building, they removed multiple witnesses and victims and escorted them from the building. As more officers arrived on scene, we began a methodical search of each floor of the 5-story structure, looking for witnesses and/or victims. Thus far, we have recovered 30 .223 casings from the crime scene. We have also recovered 7 .40 caliber casings from the crime scene. We have also found a letter on the suspect which made it clear that he came in with the intent to kill Dr. Phillips and anyone who got in his way. He blamed Dr. Phillips for the ongoing pain following the surgery. At 5:24 p.m., we received a call from the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, and that dispatcher told us a woman on the line whose name they did not have called saying that her husband had killed several people at Dr. Phillips' office. This would have been a half hour after the event occurred. We received 2 follow-up phone calls from the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office providing clarifying information. All of this information was after the fact. Once the scene was secure, the Tulsa Police Homicide and Crime Scene detectives began working the scene. They continued work until 3 a.m. this morning. We have now turned that scene back over to the hospital staff at St. Francis. I cannot emphasize enough that we train rigorously over and over and over again for not if, but when, because we have seen the violence that has taken place throughout the United States. And we would be naive not to think that that would not happen in our jurisdiction. So again, to the men and women of the Tulsa Police Department, Oklahoma Highway Patrol, all of the surrounding jurisdictions that descended upon the scene yesterday, I offer a heartfelt thanks, and I hope that each and every citizen that sees an officer today thanks an officer today, because this job is hard. It is difficult.
Thank you, Chief Franklin. I had an opportunity to walk through the clinic this morning, and I did that for 2 reasons. One of which so that I could see it for myself, more than just the lobby, which is where I was last night, but also so that I could do one thing, which is I represent over 10,000 people that make up the St. Francis Health System, and I prayed over each of the areas where it was clear that someone had laid, including the perpetrator. And I last night sent a message to our staff, and I just asked them to do 2 things. One of which is to ask questions, because there are 1,000 questions that we're gonna need to try to answer over the next couple of days, the next couple of weeks, probably next couple of months. But I also asked them to acknowledge that yesterday will change St. Francis, And it is up to us to not allow this horrible event, this situation, we can't allow that to make us want to turn our back on the reason that we're here. We were all called into this profession. Whether you're a physician or a caregiver or a support staff, we were all called into this profession to care for others and to care for our community. And while it's human nature to want to turn our backs right now, to want to walk away, we can't do that. And we won't do that. And so all I ask is for you to continue to support this organization and this community with your prayers, and know that St. Francis will come out of this even stronger still.
I'm struggling with the right things to say in this moment, and maybe that's because there's truly not any right thing to say. There's no words that can adequately describe the emotions that we have been feeling for the last 18 hours. I'm just going to speak from my heart this morning, so I hope you'll bear with me. First, to the families of our colleagues who were killed. Our hearts break for you. In addition to my administrative role as the Associate Chief Medical Officer, I'm a practicing emergency physician, and I had lunch with Dr. Phillips on Tuesday. We work really closely with our orthopedic team in the emergency department, and I know that all of my colleagues went into medicine to help people. This was their calling. Like Dr. Robertson said, this isn't just a career for them. We are supposed to be the ones that are caring for others during tragedies like this. To think that our caregivers were the victims is just incomprehensible to me. They died while serving others. They died in the line of duty. To the family of Mr. Love, our hearts break for you. I was in our emergency department last night, and I saw the trauma hall lined with our trauma team, our emergency department team, staff from the OR, our nurses, techs, respiratory therapists. They are trained just like our police departments are. We so wanted to be able to utilize our skills and training to save these precious lives. To the family of Mr. Love, I'm so sorry we couldn't save you. We are grieving with you. When I woke this morning, I really just wanted this to all be a bad dream, but this is the reality of our world right now. And today, our world and our St. Francis family are devastated. We were just starting to process the grief and emotions that being on the front line of a pandemic had left with us, and now this tragedy. But I will reiterate what Cliff said. Our job is to help and heal. And we are here to do our job, even if it's with broken hearts. On behalf of our medical staff, I would like to thank our security team and all of the first responders who, without hesitation or fear, were on scene to do what needed to be done. In the emergency department, we have a special relationship with our first responders. We work very closely with our police department, with IMSA and our other EMS agencies. They are part of the team, and we work with them on a daily basis. So thank you for being here for us in our time of need. Thank you for being here when we needed you. Thank you for all you do to serve our community. We have all asked for prayers, and I will reiterate that. Whatever faith you subscribe to, and even if you don't subscribe to a faith, I will tell you that a prayer is just a solemn request for help. And I think we could all agree that our world needs a little bit of help right now. I want to leave you with the prayer that's been on my heart since last night. Lord, I see a world that's dying, wounded by the master of deceit, groping in the darkness, haunted by the years of past defeat. But then I see you standing near me, shining with compassion in your eyes. Jesus, shine down on us. Let your love shine through us in the night. Lord, we want to be your witness. You can take what's wrong and make it right. Thank you.
I'm G.T. Bynum, the mayor of Tulsa. I want to start, I think one of the really important takeaways from the very detailed breakdown that Chief Franklin provided us today is just how many agencies and entities have lent their expertise to this response. And I want to thank a number of people who are here today to show their support for this team at St. Francis. Our Congressman Kevin Hearn, thank you. Our Sheriff Vic Regalado, my colleagues from the Tulsa City Council, Councilor Lake and Councilor Patrick, Dodson and Fowler, thank you. I've been contacted by the President's administration offering their support. Spoken with Governor Stitt. Governor wanted me to let the team here at St. Francis know that he has directed that all flags in Oklahoma are to be lowered to half staff for the next 4 nights in honor of each of these 4 victims. And I really want to thank the first responders yesterday. It is remarkable that we can be here 17 hours after this happened and hear that breakdown from Chief Franklin in such a detailed way of what happened. And that is not just because the Tulsa Police Department or the St. Francis security team was here all by themselves. It was because there were so many law enforcement experts and first responders here, not just responding to the immediate threat, though I will never forget, I spoke with an officer yesterday who's a seasoned veteran of the department, and he was one of the first people to get here. And he said, Mayor, it was like the beaches of Normandy out there. Everywhere I looked to my left and my right, there were officers running towards that building, jumping over bushes, getting around anything in their way between them and that threat so that they could save people. That is the law enforcement community that we have here in Tulsa. But I'm also so mindful, I went over to the Family Reunification Center last night. And I saw experts there from the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office and the Tulsa Police Department and so many more, leadership from St. Francis, who were there bringing their expertise in assisting victims of trauma to provide the best care that they could in the immediate aftermath of a great tragedy. And I want to thank them as well. Our focus right now is on grieving. The shooter is dead. The threat that he brought to this campus, that has been ended yesterday. But the days ahead of us and the weeks ahead of us, it is so important for this community to show the team here at St. Francis how much we love you. And I want to thank all of you for coming to work today. Every day for years, including through the worst public health crisis we've ever faced as a city, you have put yourselves at risk to save the lives of people in this city. And I hope you know how much it is appreciated. How grateful this community is for you and your work and the risks that you take, and never even appreciating that you could have to deal with this kind of risk and this kind of premeditated violence. And yet you're still here, ready to save more lives today. This is a remarkable group of people that work at the St. Francis Health System. And so I want to ask my fellow Tulsans, in the days and weeks ahead, and that's the two things I've been asked the most in the last 17 hours. One, people wanting to know the details of what happened and why it happened. Well, I think thanks to the law enforcement collaborative effort, we have a very clear understanding of that at this point. But even more than that, people want to know what they can do to help. We now know who the victims are. There will be a time to memorialize them and to show our support for their families individually. But we also know that our community needs to rally around the heroes who work at the St. Francis Health System. I speak on this as the CEO of another large organization that went through great tragedy in the last few years. I can tell you that individually, on an individual basis, when you say, we would really like people to donate to a fund, or we want everybody in town on Friday to wear pink. When there's a memorial service, we want people there lined up outside. Any one of those individual things can sound like it's not enough to compensate for the loss, and it's not. But I can also tell you that when we went through the murder of Sergeant Johnson and the grievous injury to Officer Zarkishan, the way this community rallied around the men and women of the Tulsa Police Department, the way the people on this campus at St. Francis Health System rallied around the men and women of the police department, it meant so much to our officers and their families and everyone who loves them. The collective impact of this community that is a community of such great love, that collective impact made a profound difference to people who are grieving and going through loss. And so that's what I would ask of my fellow Tulsans. If you want to help, participate in those ways that are going to come up in the days and weeks ahead, where you can show the people at St. Francis how much you love them and you support them, and that this community is here for them. I just want to say, lastly, on behalf of everyone in this community, it isn't enough to tell the team at St. Francis how much we love you and how grateful we are for you. There is nothing that we can say that will make this pain go away. But we will be here with you to walk with you through that process every step of the way. Have no doubt about that. Thank you.
Yes, Chief, what you're telling us about your men and women and the other law enforcement agencies, just first of all, is very reassuring, particularly after what happened in Texas, so I just want to say that. Secondly, regarding these victims, you talked about the physician who this man was apparently angry at. Please tell us about the other three people, why, it sounds like another physician and perhaps two civilians, who they were and why they were there.
The question is who the other victims were and why they were there. They were there for medical service. The doctor was there providing care. They stood in the way. They stood in the way, and Lewis gunned them down.
So two patients and another physician who worked in the same office?
So there were two physicians, yes. There was a receptionist and there was a patient.
Any other questions? Yeah, can we just get the spelling of first and last name of everyone?
We'll send that afterward. Yes, Kevin?
Chief, could you go through the police department's policy for dealing with an active shooter like this? You instruct your officers to go in no matter what. How do you handle something like this? And what do they instruct you to do?
When that call goes out, the first officers that arrive confirm that there is a active shooter in progress. We then have an activation that occurs through our 911 system that alerts every Tulsa police officer on duty and off duty. It alerts our special response team. It alerts our special operations team. It alerts all of our surrounding areas. Everyone responds en masse. We have all trained together. We've all worked together. We know each other's tendencies through that work. So when we get that call, we are going to disregard any safety measures that we might have for ourselves, and we are going to go in the building to deal with the threat. Our philosophy is we will stop the threat, and we will do that by any means necessary. That's exactly what the mindset of these officers were that responded on the scene yesterday, and they performed heroically, in my opinion, and I cannot thank enough the response not only from our locals, but also from the FBI, the United States Marshals Service, the ATF. All of them responded en masse. And if you were out at the scene, you saw every shoulder patch, every patch on the back of the vest from every different jurisdiction surrounding Tulsa. That's how we train. We train together. We respond together. We work with St. Francis Security, and have the director of security for St. Francis is a retired Tulsa police major. So we are always in constant contact and in sync with one another. This was a massive building, which is, again, what we train on. Large buildings, large structures create obstacles for our officers between reinforced doors, between cavernous hallways. The shots echoed in the building. So we train to enter the building. If shots are being fired, we are to move rapidly towards those shots. If shots are not being fired, we are going to be more methodical in our approach as we look for signs. And that's what these officers did when they first entered the building. They saw broken glass. They saw shell casings. They were following those shell casings around and began yelling, "Tulsa police, Tulsa police." And it was then that they heard that final gunshot. They rapidly moved to the area where they heard the final gunshot. But again, it's a cavernous building. And so those shots echoed. And they eventually found the shooter.
Next question. No, right here.
Chief, thank you. Blaine Alexander with NBC News. Can you tell us a little bit more of what you're hearing from the witnesses that you pulled from the building? We're hearing reports that the gunman passed by some people and said, "I'm not targeting you, I'm looking for a specific person." Is that the case? And then secondly, you mentioned the other three that were in the way. Is there any evidence to indicate that they were standing intentionally trying to block or shield the doctor, or were they just in the gunman's way?
I don't have any information on what the witnesses are reporting as of right now. I cannot speak to that. But I do know that the suspect, when he came into the building, into that office complex, he began firing. He began firing at anyone that was in his way. There are reports that one of the victims held the door for someone to allow them to escape out of the back door, and was shot and killed.
Okay, next question.
Sarah. The victims, I was going to ask, just to clarify, Amanda was the receptionist, I believe, and William was the patient.
Yes, that is correct.
William was the one who was taken to the hospital in critical condition originally?
Yes.
Clarification on that?
Amanda was the victim, and she was the receptionist, and the other was a patient and was taken to the hospital and later died.
And building on that, just one more question. Can you give us an update on any other victims that were wounded and may still be in there's been conflicting information coming forward too.
Okay, the question is if there are any additional victims that are wounded or in care at this moment, and I don't believe that there is at this moment, so that should quash that rumor.
Okay, next. Yes.
Can you talk about how the shooter actually got in the building and how he got to the second floor? Did he take an elevator? Did he take stairs?
The question is, how did the shooter get to the second floor? The Natalie building has a parking garage attached to it with a second floor entrance. The suspect parked on the second floor of the building and entered through that second floor entryway and worked his way into the building.
Any questions? Yep, yes.
Around the same time this happened, we got a release from Muskogee PD about a bomb threat that you guys had tipped them off by. Is that connected to this at all?
The question is about a bomb threat that came in through Muskogee Police Department. That did come in. We are still working to determine exactly how that came in. We do know that there was a response in Muskogee towards a bomb call. I believe it was at the suspect's residence, but we are still working through that portion to determine exactly what transpired there.
Any questions here? Yes. in there.
When we talked before, you said that the gun control measure you support is locking up guns. Yet here we are, it's been a terrible season of gun violence in Tulsa. Do you support even a basic red flag law, any background check, anything like that?
The question is on gun legislation and what I support. I will tell you this. I go out and I execute the law. There are legislators that legislate the law, that create the law. And I am more than happy to work with legislators if they want to bend my ear from a law enforcement perspective and ask what we need. I am more than willing to sit down and provide that information to legislators.
Thank you, Chief. Next question. Yes, in the back.
Does police have any history with Lewis?
The question is, did police have any history with the gunman, Lewis? We are still working through that as well. He is from Muskogee, and so we are still working through that to determine exactly what his contact with law enforcement may have been.
Any questions in there? Yes.
Do you know which one of the victims held the door open to that cul-de-sac?
The question is, which one of the victims held the door open to allow people to escape? I don't know that I have that information. I do know that the patient victim held a door closed, I believe, is the information that I have, to allow someone to escape out of another door.
Okay. Next question. Yes, Russell.
You said that the shooter wanted additional help from this surgeon. Are we talking about, did he want drugs? Was he trying to get more medication? Was this an opioid situation, or do you know at this point?
The question is whether or not the victim wanted additional help in the form of drugs from the medical doctor, and that is information that what we currently know is that Lewis was in pain. Lewis expressed that he was in pain and was not getting relief, and that was the circumstance surrounding this entire incident. So we will continue to develop this investigation and release information regarding more intricate details such as that.
Quick follow-up. Last night, the officers on the scene told us there were additional gunshot injuries. And you're pretty specific that nobody's being treated right now, but were other people injured by gunfire during the incident?
The question is, were other people injured by gunshots regarding this incident?
All of the additional victims were treated and released.
So there were additional victims, just to be clear.
There were additional wounded.
Those.
I'm so sorry.
Yes,
There were some additional wounded patients, but that is private information, obviously, and they were treated and released from the emergency department.
Can you say how many?
I don't have that
From
number right now.
gunshots or from the chaos?
I don't have that information right now.
Okay, Naomi?
Yeah.
So you had said that his wife called to the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. Did she know what was going to happen, or did she hear what happened and then said, that's my husband?
The question is that earlier I stated that the wife of the suspect called police and relayed information to police. The information that we currently have is that she did not know what was going to take place, but that he contacted her either before the shooting took place or during the shooting and to let her know what he had done.
Okay, Rick?
I have a logistical question, then I got
Who's it for?
well, St. Francis.
Okay.
If there's donations or anything, where do you want people to drop off these items? I mean, obviously the community agrees by leaving flowers and things like that.
So the question was about community support and where would we want donations and other things left. I would say, let me answer this in two ways. First of all, St. Francis is a family and we will take care of our own. But we also recognize the need, both locally and quite frankly nationally, to support the victims and the families of the victims in St. Francis. And so the Tulsa Community Foundation has a fund that it was already in existence for us, an employee assistance fund. And so we'll make that link available for folks that feel the need to contribute to these families and to the organization. And we just, that's really the only, I would say, official place for folks that want to do something to care for those that have been impacted by this situation.
But while you're up there, I'm looking at Dr. Phillips's resume. This is impressive. Can you talk about his talent? Tell us who this man was to this organization.
No, that's fine. Preston, Dr. Phillips was the consummate gentleman. He is a man that we should all strive to emulate. And of everybody, you know, the fact that some individual would go after Dr. Phillips is mind-blowing. He's one of those folks that, you know, tends to, his clinic can not always be on time because he will spend every minute with patients that they need. He is one of those doctors that was cut from the cloth of 4 decades ago in terms of how he felt about people and how he felt about his calling. And so not only is it a shock, it is the ultimate loss for St. Francis and for Tulsa.
Are there any questions for Dr. Robertson while he's here? Yes.
I guess, has Dr. Phillips raised any concern that the suspect was able to alert anybody that this might be a possibility that he was concerned about his safety?
So the question was, had Dr. Phillips alerted anyone about his concerns, or did he have concerns about his safety or this patient? And not that we're aware of as of today.
Yes, right here.
Is there a policy in place if there is a patient that is harassing a doctor? Is there a policy in place for St. Francis?
So the question was, is there a policy in place around patients or to react or respond to patients harassing physicians? And I would answer that, the short way to answer that is we have multiple policies and practices in place that are designed to deal with difficult situations, difficult patients, unhappy patients, and but nothing that we have in place, I don't know that any health system in the country has in place, can stop somebody with 2 weapons that are hell-bent on causing harm.
Okay, right here.
Has St. Francis had any mass shooting drills or training before here on campus?
So the question was, have we had mass shooting drills or training? We actually have training and we have educational modules. I couldn't speak to actual drills, but as I said earlier, there's going to be 1,000 questions that we as an organization are going to need to answer, and that's going to be one of them about our path going forward.
We can follow up on that. And wait, right here. Go ahead. Yes.
What could you tell us about the other victim, Dr. Stephanie Reese?
She's another one of the physicians that works in our orthopedic department. Stephanie is just was an incredible person, and Amanda was, I think, had a supervisory role within the clinic. I mean, the three best people in the entire world that are the most committed to doing what they do every day and taking care of others didn't deserve to die this way.
Here in the middle.
I'm not sure if this may be a question for you or the chief. Do we know if the gunman's antagonism against Dr. Phillips was racially motivated at all?
The question was about racial motivation, and I can't answer that.
I will answer that. The information that we have thus far is that there was nothing about race that caused this incident to take place.
Okay, and a follow-up. How far did he have to go to get to Dr. Phillips' office? And then where he was found, was that in Dr. Phillips' office or was it somewhere else?
The question was, how far did he have to go to get to Dr. Phillips' office, and was he found in that office or somewhere else? It's a short distance from the doorway of the second floor entrance into the physician's office there. He was found in the lobby area of the physician's office. So this is a vast building, lots of walls, lots of space, lots of doors that open into other doors, and he was found in one of those waiting areas.
Okay, I only have a few more questions left. Hold on, right here.
Just a couple of questions. You spoke about the firearms purchasing, confirming that they were purchased legally, whether background checks on the guns were purchased.
The question was on the gun purchases and whether or not they were purchased legally. The information that we have at the current time is that they were legally purchased firearms. One purchased an hour and some change before the actual shooting event took place, and the other purchased 3 days before the shooting took place.
Okay, Rick. Hold on, Rick.
You are a hospital. How much triage was done at the scene, or was it to get them into the ER as fast as you could? How did you handle these injuries as you came along?
So the answer was about triage. So in conjunction with our emergency medical personnel with IMSA and Tulsa Fire and Rescue, there are protocols in place to triage at the scene. So if someone doesn't have signs of life, or they can determine that, they are in fact deceased, then they don't transport those patients. They are trained to extricate and quickly move the patients that have signs of life or who are critical, and that is what happened. Our trauma team was prepared and ready for however many victims we were going to receive, but ultimately we just received the one critical victim.
But as far as your procedures, once your lockdown was lifted, were you rushing journeys over there, or?
The one critical patient was received when we were on lockdown. We still received the patient.
I only have time for 2 more questions. I have people here. Yes, in the back.
Chief, you talked about the AR-15 and when it was bought. Was that the clear cut indicator of motive?
Repeat that question, please.
Was how quickly that gun was bought before he entered into this building or the building across the street? How clear of a motive did that give you that this was premeditated, thought out?
The question is whether the purchase of the firearm gave clear motive to the intent of the shooter. I don't believe I can state any more that there was clear motive. This was what he planned to do. I mentioned that he had a letter that he had authored left on his person after the shooting. That letter led us and told us the story. So this was something that was planned.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, one, right here in the back blue shirt, yes.
What is the spelling of Michael Lewis?
We'll get that afterward. Yes, real quick.
Very quickly, can you speak at all to the interaction between Dr. Phillips and this patient? Was he responsive to these repeated concerns about pain? And maybe that's perhaps for you, sir. Were he in his office responsive to him and his concerns?
Dr.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The question is whether or not Dr. Phillips was responsive to the care and the concerns of the patient. And from the investigation that we have thus far is, yes, that office was responsive. That office made a follow-up appointment for the suspect, and that suspect did go to that appointment the day before the shooting took place yesterday. So the doctor's office was receptive, responsive, and attempting to administer care to the patient.
Okay, we're only doing 2 more questions. Channel 2, really quick.
I'm just looking for clarification. So I know you said he went in through the parking garage on the 2nd floor. How was he able to enter with such a large firearm? Is there security on that floor as well? Or is it kind of open access for patients? And was it hidden or was he just walking?
The question is whether or not when the gunman entered the building, how open is that building to entry? And it is an entry that is open to the public, just as any other building, just as you walked in here today. There is no one to greet you at that door, so he was able to walk in without any type of challenge.
This is the last question. I'm sorry, guys, we're here.
Chief, do you have any reason to believe that if your officer did not get into that building as quickly as you did, he would have kept firing if it?
The question is, if our officers had not gone into the building as quickly as we did, do we think the gunman would have continued to fire indiscriminately? And the answer to that, I think, is that in our mindset, we believe that we have to stop that threat and we have to do it immediately, and time is of the essence. And so we are trained to go in there and stop the threat, regardless of what may happen to us. And that's what our officers did. We have no reason to believe that he was going to stop. That is the mindset that we have. That's how we operated, and that's what the officers, the initial officers that went into the building, that's exactly what they did. They sought him out, attempting to stop the threat. Okay.
That concludes our news conference. If you are going to do any one-on-one interviews or anything like that, live setups, it needs to be outside, and we need to clear this area. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.